So we are going to be doing the 1 year chronological, obviously, and I will be basically we're going to use this text, obviously, because we liked what ended up happening when we talked about doing the chronological Bible. There's two versions. There's the NIV version and there's the NLT version. And if I had to do one, I do prefer the NIV as far as the text. And there's nothing wrong with the New Living Translation, but the New Living Translation, for whatever reason, it was a different plan. So the plan was slightly different, like different things were in different places. And so the plan was better in the New Living Translation. I will actually, most of the stuff that I talk about, I will actually do it from the ESV, right? That's actually my favorite version. It's a little more literal, well, a lot more literal than the New Living Translation. Again, there's nothing wrong with the New Living Translation, but I do prefer, to be a little more literal. You lose a little bit. So that's fine. As you go through and you're looking at it, please look through the passages, and there will be differences. And if there's something that seems really different, ask. Say, why is this so different in my Bible? If it seems extreme, right? And so that's what we're going to do. So what is the purpose of this class? So normally when I teach verse by verse. So we'll do for instance, we were doing John. And so in my Sunday school class, and so I will do each chapter and we will go verse by verse and explain what it means and all of that. That is not what we're doing in here, right? Because obviously we're not going to go verse by verse from, 1:1, Genesis 1:1 to, 24:60, whatever, right? So obviously we're not going to do that. And so, we're going to pick out passages that have major themes that we need to know. Context is my favorite thing in the whole world, context. And some of the stranger passages that we normally skip over, because I think that's one of the major issues when we study the Bible. I think when we go to read it, we start reading and we get through and there's passages that we just don't understand. Because we're too far removed from the context of those original people, and we just can't get it unless you have, extra books and all this stuff, and most people don't have time for that. It's hard to find time to read the Bible, much less read, books about the Bible. And so basically I have done that for you, and I'm going to filter that for you as much as I can. So what is the purpose of this class? It's to understand the importance of context when reading the Bible. This includes historical context, literary context, and social context, right? Two of my favorite Bible scholars, one's an Old Testament scholar and one's a New Testament scholar, John Walton, who's the Old Testament scholar, he says this. He says, though the Bible was written for us, it was not written to us. Right? It was written to people who lived 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. It wasn't written to us. It was written in language that those people understood, in literary genres that those people understood, and they knew what it meant, right? Whereas when we look back, it's hard because we don't understand that context. And so what we often do is we supply context from our own time, right? So we just assume. So for instance, my favorite example is, come on in, guys.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. So one of my favorite examples is, the book of Revelation, the locusts in chapter 9. People look at that and they're like, I have no idea what this means. So those must be helicopters, right? And it's like, no, they're not helicopters. Like, they would not have known what helicopters were, and the book's written to them. So that doesn't make any sense for them, right? And so that would be a problem. And that leads into my next quote, which is from Ben Witherington, who is my favorite New Testament scholar. And he says, a text without a context is just a pretext for whatever you want it to mean, right? So if you don't read the Bible in context and you don't consider what the original readers or hearers thought, then you can just make up meaning, right? And that's how we get, heretics. Zach talked about, being a heretic. That's how we get heretical interpretations or crazy interpretations when people do not consider the original context first. Once we understand how the ancient audience understood the Bible, then we can apply it to our lives today, right? But it does take a little bit of work to do that. So we're going to start with Genesis 1 through 11, talking about that. And again, we're not going to go verse by verse, but we will pick out some different parts. So when we read through Genesis 1 through 11, which we call the prehistory, right? That's before records, written records and such, for the most part. And so we look at that and we have specific questions, right? And listen, just for the record, these questions are valid questions. The problem is it's not the questions that the ancient readers would have had or the ancient hearers would have had, right? So for instance, we ask questions like, were the days of creation literal, right? Was it 6 literal days? Was it 24-hour periods? Was it long periods? Is it not literal at all? All of those types of questions. Those are the things that modern readers want to know about, right? But the ancient audience, that would not have been a concern at all because they lived in the ancient world and they had a particular understanding about the world. And this, the creation narrative and all of that, those first 11 chapters, it spoke to them in a different way than what we want out of it. How can there be light if there's no sun or moon, right? We asked that question. So that the light's first and then there's the sun and the moon. Well, how could that be? And we're trying to ask scientific questions that the Bible does not claim to try to provide us, right? Those answers. Why does Eve not freak out when suddenly the serpent starts talking to her, right? So like, how many of you have stopped at that and said, you know what? She just talks to it as though it's just normal, right? So again, ancient audience, they're like, this doesn't bother them, right? My favorite, which I get asked all the time. So if Cain is banished and he's worried about other people hurting him, and then he eventually gets married, who does he marry if there aren't other people, right? And listen, all of those questions have actual answers, and you can do those, but we're not going to do those, right? Those questions are not the questions that we're concerned about in this class. The questions that we ask of the text today were not concerns of the ancient readers, right? We look at the Bible in the wrong context. Note that at no time in the Bible do we find a place where Yahweh attempts to change the ancient understanding concerning the physical world, right? There's no place where the ancients had an understanding about their world that is non-scientific, where Yahweh said, it's not really like that. There's actually amoebas and, disease and all. There's none of that. So for instance, when you read through the Bible and we just take it as though it's, we talk about, well, I feel it in my heart and things like that. We just say that, right? But we don't really think that thinking is in our hearts, right? That's just what we've always heard. But the ancients believed absolutely that the locus of your intelligence was in your heart and in your intestines, right? And so when you don't know that because you read it in English, right? But if you read the Hebrew, it says your heart and your intestines. Many times it's actually the intestines, right? And you say, well, that just sounds crazy. Why did they think that? Well, it's really fairly obvious. Hey, buddy. It's really fairly obvious. Let's say that, Wendy, when I first met Wendy, right? And I wanted to ask Wendy out on a date, right? So let's just say, I'm going to ask Wendy out, and I've built myself up. What's going to happen? Yeah, my heart's going to start beating, right? And then my stomach is going to be like, oh, right? And so we know, like, you all laugh, right? And it is funny, of course. And you all laugh because you know exactly what those things are. And you know basically what's happening. And we know that your brain sends messages to your heart and to your stomach and all these things. They didn't know any of those things. So when they had that same scenario, right, and they felt that and, in their stomach, clearly that made sense to them, right? Because that's the way they understood things. One of my favorite examples of how we know that is that in ancient Egypt, when you were mummified, they would take all of the major organs that were important, right? And so they would take, for instance, the liver, and they would take, they would take the heart, they would take the intestines, right? And all these things, and they would put them in different containers and stuff, right? Well, the brain, which was completely useless to them, they would stick a hook up through the nose and pull the brain out, piece by piece and just throw it away. So that sounds crazy, and you're like, oh, why are you telling us? Because that shows you what those ancient people thought about the brain. It's not useful for anything, so we just dispose of it, right? And so that's just the way they believed, right? And we don't look at them and say, oh, they were so stupid, right? Well, I mean, they lived in an ancient world, right? Child conception. And let me just say right here at the forefront, there will be times when we will talk about some, R-rated subjects, okay? So just know that, and we will talk about a few today. So just, we're all adults, right? So child conception. How did they understand child conception? Well, for an ancient person, they believed that the child was fully formed inside the sperm, right? And so then the sperm is injected into the woman, who is simply an incubator, right? She has one job, according to an ancient person, and her job is to be a suitable incubator for that child who's already born. Or not born, but created, right? And it just grows inside her stomach. And again, that makes sense to an ancient person, right? That's why it's always her fault if there's no children, right? Because we know all kinds of things about, medicine and stuff today. And we know, if you can't have children, both the man and the woman get tested, right? Because there's many things that could be wrong with the man. There's many things that could be wrong with the woman. And so we run all those tests and do all those things. In the ancient world, it's just her fault, right? Because you had one job to be an incubator and you messed that up, right? And so that's the way they believed. The earth, right? So how did they understand the earth? So the earth is think of it as a snow globe, right? The earth is a round disc like this, and it has the earth and it has water around it. It has, in Hebrew, it has Sheol underneath the bottom. In Greek, it has Hades, and they're similar ideas. Sometimes Sheol and Hades are an actual place in the underworld. Sometimes they are just the grave. In other words, you're just dead, right? And so, but they're used interchangeably, right? Sometimes it's a place that you could potentially go. Sheol, you don't generally go, but Hades, you could get there if you did the right things and went to the right place. There's a solid dome over the top. That's what the firmament is, just for the record. In the creation story, there's a firmament. It's a solid dome. When they look up, when the waters are spread apart, there's waters put over the dome because, again, they look up and they see blue, and so there's water. And sometimes that stuff falls out of the sky, and so they're like, well, it's up there. And they thought that there were windows, the sun and the moon and the stars. They run in a circuit that goes through the dome, and then it goes under, and it goes into the underworld, and then it comes back around, and it goes back up. And that's how they understood days, right? Some people understood that as those were actual gods, and then others, of course, understood that, that it was celestial bodies, which is one of the things that the creation narrative explains. Sometimes that bothers people, and they're like, well, I don't know, that seems like a lie, right? It's like, that's a lie. It's not a lie. It's teaching ancient people in language that those people understood, right? Because you think, well, I don't know. I think God would teach them that, that he wouldn't say anything that wasn't, like literally true. Well, let's say that God decided to teach science to ancient people, right? And he said, you know what? That's not how the earth works. It works this way, right? Well, so then you have to pick a decade. Right? What decade of science is God going to choose to teach them? Right? Because we just assume today, of course, he would teach us like it is today, right? But 100 years ago and 150 years ago and 200 years ago, science was very different. The understanding of the world was very different. They still put leeches on people to suck out bad blood. There were lots of things that were different, right? But right now, we are, of course, at the high point in science. No, we're not. 100 years from now, there's going to be all kinds of crazy things that we could never even conceive of, right? And so, so you say, okay, well, God should have taught science. Well, no, because at what point is he going to, teach them science? It's like which science, right? Because science does change, and that's the nature of science. So you have to understand the way they understood. So Genesis 1 through 11 is meant to answer for ancient Israelites, not those questions, but questions about Yahweh, the God of Israel, and his relationship with mankind, Israel itself, the pagan gods around them, and the nations, right? That's the point of the creation narrative, not to teach them about science. And I'm not saying that those things in there aren't literal. I'm not saying anything about, I'm just saying ancient people did not care about those things, right? That's not, they would not have even considered those things. They would just be confused. The ancient Israelites worshiped other gods throughout the Old Testament. So the Bible spends a lot of time showing how Yahweh, the God of Israel, is not like the pagan gods. The existence of multiple gods was assumed throughout the ancient world. Worshiping the gods brought prosperity, health, children, safety, success in battle, according to the ancient people, right? And so again, we look at that and we think, well, that's just ridiculous. Because, I mean, God said there was only one God and all of those things. Well, yeah. So that would be just like if you know, a Muslim came to you and said, well, hey, you should believe this. Well, you're not going to do that. As a Christian, you know, you guys are Christians. And so you would say, no, that's ridiculous. I'm not going to change my beliefs. That's because you've held these beliefs, right? Most of you, your whole lives probably, or at least you've understood them your whole lives. Well, in the ancient world, they all grew up believing that there were multiple gods. And so it was hard for them not to worship multiple gods. So you have many people, of course, in the Old Testament who did not worship the other gods, but the vast majority of people in the Old Testament just assumed that they were there, right? So again, and moving past that a little bit, one major purpose of the first 11 chapters of Genesis is to change the way ancient Israelites thought about Yahweh, the one true God, right? Versus what they understood about the gods around them. So again, they grew up in a world where there are all these other gods and all this other stuff is happening. And then, you know, they get people telling them, no, there's only, you know, there's the one true God is Yahweh, right? Well, that would have been hard for them. So what did the ancient Near Eastern people believe about their world, and how did they understand the gods? Well, of course, it's word of mouth, but we can actually go back and we can read texts that tell us about those gods that they worshiped, right? And that the other people around them worshiped. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples, and I'm going to give you a couple of parallels to some of the stuff in Genesis 1 through 11 to show you how the perspective is different. So one story, for instance, is called Atrahasis, which means wise man in Akkadian, a language that's related to Hebrew. And so in Atrahasis, you have this group of higher gods, and there's work to be done, and so they make these lower gods, and they're called the Igigi gods. And so they make these gods to do the work that needs to be done, and it's digging canals and all of this kind of stuff. And so they don't like doing that, so they rebel, right? And so they go to the house of the main god, and they come up with an idea, and they say, you know what, we're going to create humans to do all the work. After a long period of time, the humans become annoying just because they're too loud for the gods, and so they decide that they're going to get rid of them. The gods decide to send a flood, right? And so one god tells Atrahasis, the wise man, to build an ark, right? Or what we would call an ark. Atrahasis' ark is actually just completely round, right? He survives, and the gods are happy because they lived off of his sacrifices, right? And so, or the human sacrifices, and so they actually ate the sacrifices, and so that made them happy, right? Another story is called Enuma Elish, which is when on high. Oftentimes, ancient stories, they're just named by scholars from the first words in it. And then, again, in Akkadian, Enuma Elish is when on high. And it's a story about Marduk, right, who is the head of the gods in Babylon, right, so the Babylonian Empire. And so you have, in that story, you have a sea dragon / serpent. This is not like the serpent in the creation narrative. This is like a dragon, more like what you have in Daniel, Leviathan that you get in Job, the dragons in Revelation. And it's fighting against the other gods. The gods ask Marduk to come and fight her, and he agrees if they will promote him to be the head of the Babylonian gods, right? So they agree, and he defeats Tiamat, who is the dragon. He defeats Tiamat he's the storm god, so he controls the winds. So he blows air into her mouth, and her stomach extends, and then he shoots her with an arrow, and she explodes, right? They take her body, they rip it apart, they create the heavens and the earth, and then one of her allies is killed, and they use his blood to create humans, and then humans are made to serve the gods, right? So now, how do the first 11 chapters attempt to change this worldview, right? That's the worldview that the ancient Israelites lived in, right? First of all, there is only one God, right? Makes that clear. The celestial bodies are not gods. They are created by Yahweh, the God of Israel, right? God is not part of the created order, but the creator of it and outside of it, right? Because in the ancient world, all of the gods are created by some other gods. And so they're very human because they're made up by humans, right? And so when you look at the gods, they argue with each other, they fight back and forth. You know, they're like humans because, again, they're made by humans, right? Humans conceive of human gods, right? God made everything and not through battle, right? He just spoke it, right? And things happened. Humans were not made to do the works of other gods, but out of love and to be God's image bearers on earth. And the flood was not sent because humans were annoying. It was because man had gotten so evil that a flood needed to be sent, right? And they needed to be destroyed. They needed to be judged because of their evil, not because of some, precarious nature of a god somewhere, right? So that's that. So when we get to, then we go to the Tower of Babel, right? And we have, of course, the story. They're building the tower, and it's to reach the heavens, right? And we kind of have a misunderstanding of what that means. And what does it mean that they're trying to get to the heavens? They're trying to build a temple that reaches to the heavens. Well, the Tower of Babel was what we call a ziggurat, right? And a ziggurat is like a pyramid, but it has the steps on it, right? It's those stepped pyramids that go up like this. And so the point of the ziggurat was they built a room in the top of it, and then there was a place for worship down at the bottom. The whole point of the rest of it is pretty much just for the purpose I'm about to tell you. It really had no other purposes. Some of the temples they would store grain and stuff in, but for this, it's just for one purpose. It is to allow the God to come down to the temple and then to come down to the earth, right? Because the God can't do that if he doesn't have a temple, right? And so, so that's the point, is to make or allow the God to come down. And of course, the God can't come down if we don't make this temple. And so it's a bit of manipulation, right? We're going to bring the God down, then we're going to manipulate the God to do our will. Well, do you remember what God is doing while they're building this tower that will allow God to come down? Does anybody remember? He is walking around amongst them, right? Watching them build the tower. And so what that tells you is that God doesn't need a tower, right? And the problem and their sin is that they're trying to conceive of God in this ancient Near Eastern view of, it needs mankind in order to do things, right? In order to get around and all of this. And so it's another attempt to contrast God of Israel, the one true God, with the ancient Near Eastern gods. God doesn't need your tower, right? All right. So then, in all of that, there's another strange story. And it's in Genesis 6, 1 through 4, if you want to look at that. And so, this was your favorite. So, I will read this one. And I'll read it out of the New Living Translation. It says, "Then the people began to multiply on the earth, and daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw the beautiful women and took any they wanted as their wives. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not put up with humans for such a long time, for they are only mortal flesh. In the future, their normal lifespan will be no more than 120 years, if I can speak. In those days, and for some time after, giant Nephilites, or the Nephilim, as other translations will say, lived on the earth. For whenever the sons of God had intercourse with women, they gave birth to children who became the heroes and famous warriors of ancient times." right? So what is that? Okay, so you have the giants, right? And then you have sons of God, and you have daughters of men, right? Which here it says, saw the beautiful women. The ESV will say the sons of God and the daughters of men. Most translations have that. I like this one because it had, I use this one because it had giants. Often translations will have giants. The ESV does not actually say giants. So what does all this mean, right? And at this one, I'm going to be a little sad for you because at the end, I'm not going to be able to give you an actual answer of exactly what this means, but I am going to give you the options of how it's been interpreted by Bible scholars. So first of all, in the simplest seeming explanation, but probably not correct, is that the sons of God are the godly line of Seth, right? So you have the sons of God is that godly line of Seth that you get. And then the daughters of men are the ungodly line of Cain, right? And so you have the two lines, then the godly line and the ungodly line mixed together, and then basically the religion gets corrupted, right? Well, it's kind of a superficial division of sons of God and daughters of men, right? So that's a bit of a problem. One point that scholars make that could be is that when it talks about giants, it may be that it's not talking about literal giants, but it's talking about those heroes, which it does mention, heroes of old. Like we say giants in sports, right? Sports giants, right? And so it could be something like that, right? That's a possibility. But note that sons of God clearly means divine beings in the other places it is used in the Old Testament. So when you have the exact phrase sons of God, which happens to be all three in Job, when you see sons of God, it clearly means divine beings. And so with that interpretation, it would mean that the sons of God are actual angels, right? They're divine beings, and the daughters of men are actual human women, and they have offspring, right? And that sounds certainly crazy, right? Absolutely it does. But that is the interpretation that someone gave it much later, about 200 years before Jesus, in a book called First Enoch, right? And you say, well, First Enoch, I think during my Revelation Bible study, I do think some people came to me and they said, I was looking for First Enoch, and I couldn't find it. And right, so just for the record, First Enoch is not in your Bible. And I get that, that because sometimes I just talk about other books as though they're... So First Enoch is not in your Bible. It's not in... Well, I will say it's actually in the Ethiopian Bible, right? Strangely enough. But it's not in your Bible. However, it was very popular during the time of Christ, right? And so you still say, I don't know that we should be using outside books to interpret the Bible. Well, first of all, you have to. But second of all, Peter and Jude had no problem with it because 2 Peter 2:4 cites it and alludes to it. Let me say that. It alludes to it. And then Jude 6 cites it directly. And then Jude also quotes directly from it in chapter or verse 15. So what does that mean? That means that during the time of Jesus, that was a popular understanding of what the sons of God and the daughters of men meant, right? That's what many people believed. Does that mean then, since Peter and Jude quoted from it or talked about it, that it should be in the Bible, right? Because if you watch the Discovery Channel, anytime there's something like this, it's always like, banned from the Bible or, these books were taken out of your Bible by Constantine or whatever, right? No, that's not what that means. It means that it was popular in the day and they used it as an illustration to make a point, right? That's the point. Paul uses Greek philosophy. The book of Revelation uses a lot of First Enoch's imagery and symbols and stuff. I mean, again, it doesn't mean that they should be, that they're divinely inspired or anything like that. But they are used. And again, that's at least a belief that was going on during the time of Jesus. So again, I'm not saying that that's correct, right? I'm just saying those are the options that scholars usually will throw around, right? And again, the people in Jesus' day seem to at least be familiar with that understanding. the genealogies, I'll say a word about or a few words about the genealogies. As you go through and you have all these genealogies, why? Why do we have all those, right? How many of you skip through the genealogies? Don't lie in church, right? So first of all, what's the point? One is they serve as a fast forward to get to the next story, right? So you have a story, right? And then you have a genealogy that gets to the end of that genealogy, and that's the next story, right? Like, so for instance, Terah has Abraham, and then boom, you're there at Abraham, right? And then we talk about Abraham or Abram, right? And so that's one of the points. Another point is to show the outworking of death and evil, right? So you have such and such had such and such and such and such and such and lived so many years and then died, right? And then such and such lived and had such and such and such and such and such and they died, right? And so that shows the outcropping of death, right? And sin. And so so there's that. Who is, just out of curiosity, do you remember who the one guy is in the line of Seth that did not die? Enoch, right? Enoch. And so when the author of First Enoch, when he went back, he was obviously thinking about Genesis. And he was like, okay, you got these sons of God, daughters of men. You got this guy Enoch that he didn't even die. He just went up to heaven. So there's a story there, right? And so he wrote a story. And it's a good story. It's a long story. They also show how the nations came to be, defined by the offspring of patriarchs and others in the Old Testament, right? So it gives you a sense for what they're like. And in some cases, it's polemical, right? So it sets us up to dislike people like we're about to get to right now. Certain people right at the beginning, like we're like, oh, wait, those people, we don't like those people, right? Because of the way that they were begat, if you will, right? If I could use that word. All right, this is where it gets real R-rated. So exciting, right? All right. The curse of Canaan in Genesis 9:18 through 29. And this is another one that I'll read for you. All right. It says, the sons of Noah who went forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan, right? So it tells you right there at the beginning. Ham was the father of Canaan, you know, because keep in mind, this is written down after the fact, considerably after the fact. After David, probably, well, yeah, this probably is written down after David, right? And so this is looking in hindsight, like we have already defeated the Canaanites and stuff at the point this is written down. And so the author here, whether it be Moses or the editor that came after Moses or however you want to look at that, he is giving that editorial, well, it couldn't be, Moses couldn't have written that part because note that Moses died before the conquest of Canaan, right? So it would be a later editor who came in and put all the first 5 books together. And then he put this editorial comment. Ham was the father of Canaan. And we know that the Canaanites are bad, right? Those are the people that we wiped off the face of the earth, or we were supposed to, and we didn't do it, right? So that was bad. And why were we supposed to wipe them off the face of the earth? So that we did not do what? Intermarry, which would have the problem with intermarriage is that we would have done what? Solomon does it. Worship their gods, right? Worship their gods. And so, so it tells you right at the outset that Ham is bad. That's a bad guy, like, right? So don't like him, right? And you're really not going to like him in a minute. Noah began to be a man of the soil, and he planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk and lay uncovered in his tent. Okay? And Ham, the father of Canaan, notice it says it again, right? Saw the nakedness of his father and told his brothers outside. He saw the nakedness of his father and told his brothers outside, right? Okay, let me just say, that may seem weird, right? Okay, maybe that's odd. To us today, that seems odd. Let me just say, I mean, I guess like a guy's locker room, which I've never been in one, but like a guy's locker room, I'm guessing there's probably naked guys in there, right? I would guess that. And I don't think they're shocked at that fact. And I can tell you in the ancient world, I mean, Probably would not be that shocking, right, to see father naked if he's passed out drunk and he's, so right there, you should be kind of like, well, what is that all about? Then Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father. What? Their faces were turned backward, and they did not see their father's nakedness. Okay, so that's strange. That's respect. Yeah, right. That's a lot of respect. Well, and you're about to see what kind of respect it is. When Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him, well, I mean, is that doing something to him? Like he saw him? He told the brothers? I mean, maybe. He said, "Cursed be Ham." No. He said, "Cursed be Canaan. A servant of servants shall be, so shall he be to his brothers." He also said, "Blessed be the Lord, for God," okay, let me try that again. He also said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant." Right? So note, again, the continued mention of Canaan, right? So we have some questions, right? What does it mean that Ham saw the nakedness of his father? Why do his brothers walk backwards to cover their father? Why does Noah say that Ham did something to him? And why does Canaan, the son of Ham, get punished instead of Ham himself? Right? So that doesn't seem to make any sense, right? There are actually four. There are four views on this, okay? And I'll tell you which one seems more likely at the end, okay? It's the last view. The first one is what we call the voyeuristic view, okay? It just means that he went in and he looked at his father naked. And maybe it means there was some ill intention of looking at his father. Maybe he, whatever, right? So he looked at his father and that was bad. Well, the punishment seems harsh, right, for that. And it doesn't explain why his offspring would be cursed. Like, why is Canaan? Why didn't he just kill Ham? Which would, in the ancient world, if you did some, sexual, deviancy or whatever, that would be your punishment. You would be killed. And so why is it that Canaan is cursed for his entire, offspring, or Ham's offspring are cursed? The second one, and listen, I'm telling you that I promise you, these aren't just made up in Joe Turner's head. I'm just telling you that these are views that can be done from the text. And like I said, some of them are fairly, rough, if you will. The second one is the paternal incest view, right? So that view is that he did something to his father, right? He actually assaulted his father in some way that was inappropriate, obviously. The next one, I promise you, these are real views, is the paternal castration view. Some scholars will argue, based on the text and the Hebrew, and saying, well, these, it probably means this from this. They'll say that for whatever reason, he went in and he castrated his father, right? Again, I would argue that takes a lot out of the text that's not there, right? And you're going to say, when I say the last one, which is probably the correct one, you're going to say, well, that definitely takes a lot out of the text that's not there. But then I'm going to show you that it's pretty clearly there. The last view is that he sexually assaulted his mother or his father's wife, right? And you say, well, it said nothing about any females in the thing at all right? So how does the text support that? Well, if you were to look at Leviticus 20:17, and I'll give you a second if you want to look at that. Leviticus 20:17, it says, if a man takes his sister, a daughter of his father or a daughter of his mother, and sees her nakedness, and she sees his nakedness, it is a disgrace, and they shall be cut off in the sight of the children of their people. He has uncovered his sister's nakedness, and he shall bear his iniquity, right? So in Leviticus 20:17, you're going to have to follow there's going to be a few steps to this. In Leviticus 20:17, seeing the nakedness of the brother or sister is equated with uncovering the nakedness of the brother or sister, right? So seeing and uncovering are the same thing, right? It has to do with a sex act. But what does it mean then to uncover one's nakedness, right? Leviticus 20:11 says, if a man lies with his father's wife, he has uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon them. So note that here, uncovering nakedness clearly means a sex act, and it is made clear that uncovering the nakedness of the father means that the act is with the father's wife, right? So it is a euphemism for doing the deed, if you will, with the father's wife, whether that be your mother or your father's concubine or whatever it may be. Further explained in Leviticus 18:7 through 8, it says, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your father, which is the nakedness of your mother. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is your father's nakedness, right? So again, the nakedness of the mother is the nakedness of the father, right? So it's a euphemism again. So this is the logic, and you can just listen instead of, I know some of you are like, wait a minute, I'm trying to add this together. All right, I'm going to break it down for you. So if seeing the nakedness and uncovering the nakedness is the same thing, right? Seeing the nakedness and uncovering the nakedness is the same thing. And uncovering clearly has to do with a sex act. And uncovering the nakedness of the father means this, the sexual act is with the father's wife. Then we can surmise that Ham committed a sexual act with his father's wife, whether that be his mother or his stepmother, right? So, you say, well, why does this help? Like, why do I want to know this? This is going to give me nightmares, right? Because it explains every element of the story, right? It explains why he did it, right? When Absalom decided that he was going to take David's kingdom, what was one of the first things he did? He slept with 10 of his concubines, right? He slept with 10 of the concubines. And so that was a power play. Once you go in and you sleep with the king's concubines, you are saying, you're not in charge anymore, I'm in charge, right? And so that is a major power play. So what is Ham doing? He is attempting to usurp the power of his father, if you go by this view, right? That makes sense that he's attempting to usurp the power of his father. It explains why the brothers don't want to look, right? Because if it's their mother or even their stepmother, that is not something that would be normal. In other words, you would not want to see that, right? Certainly if she had been assaulted. And so if he goes out and tells them and he says, hey, guess what I just did? I'm in charge now. So then they feel bad, of course, for the mother. And somebody in my class asked, they said, well, what about, why didn't Ham do anything? Well, why didn't Noah do anything? Because Noah was drunk and passed out, right? So that was a problem. It explains the curse of the offspring, right? So it's not Ham that's cursed, it's Canaan. Because if Ham's mother or even his stepmother got pregnant and had a child, which was Canaan, then that would explain why we look down on A, the offspring of Ham, and B, the Canaanites in general, right? It is polemical. It says, well, hey, the Canaanites that were supposed to wipe off the face of the earth, they started out bad, right? They were the, offspring of this incestuous relationship. So, they were bad from the beginning, right? So that's one thing. And of course, that's the offspring, the Canaanites are the offspring. It's similar to Lot's daughters having sexual relations with him, which produces the Moabites, right? The Moabites also a hated people group of Israel. And so it's like, the Moabites, yeah, they're the offspring of, it's like saying your mother today, right? You're going to get somebody back. You're like, your mother. Well, here it's like saying really bad things about your mother, right? And you're the father of your people group, right? And so that seems to be what's going on there. All right. Another important thing is God's covenant, and this is not complicated. I'm just going to say God's covenant with Abraham, right? That is the foundational thing in Judaism, right? The covenant between God and Abraham. And so the best place, it says it many times, it re-ups it several times. The best place that you can get it all in one spot is Genesis 12, 1 through 3. And it says, "Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you." And that land that he will show him is the land of Canaan, which is the land that he will get later on. "And I will make of you a great nation," right, in that land, "and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed," right? That, according to obviously Christianity and more Christians, will find its ultimate fulfillment in Jesus, right? Who is the ultimate blessing of Abraham's lineage, right? That does become a blessing to all nations, right? Or who doesn't become a blessing to all nations. All right. So we have about 10 minutes left. All right. So I'm going to go through considerably more quickly. Not that I'm going to like speed read, but these are considerably shorter things. And I'm just going to discuss them. You don't really have to look at them. Just to explain in case you have questions about why these things are here. Note that when Lot and Abraham separate, okay, so that says that they have too many, they have too many animals and stuff, and their servants are starting to fight each other and all that stuff. They separate. How does Lot choose where he's going to go?
He picked the best looking land.
He picked the best looking place, which was in the plains where Sodom and Gomorrah are, right? Which is a bad place. That ends up being bad for him. He gets in a war, and then he ends up in even more trouble in his house and all that crazy stuff. So, so note that he sees with his eyes, and he's like, that place looks great. And so he goes there. So he picks somewhat selfishly. Abraham says, I'll just take whichever one you don't want, right? And so he has faith at that point. Melchizedek, all right? So you get to Melchizedek, which is there at Salem. We don't know anything about Melchizedek except for what it says right there. Note that sometimes people will associate Jesus with Melchizedek, and they'll say, well, Melchizedek was Jesus. Well, it says he's a priest of the Most High God. It doesn't say that he's God or anything like that. And so the reason that we make that connection is because Hebrews uses a lot about Melchizedek and talks about him and says that Jesus is a priest like Melchizedek, right? It's not saying that Jesus is Melchizedek. It's saying he's like Melchizedek. So again, for all of you inquiring minds who are like, well, wait a minute, who's Melchizedek? You don't really know. There's no way to know. There are stories in the intertestamental period, which are between the Old Testament and the New Testament, that talk about Melchizedek. But again, it would be just like the story in 1 Enoch, right? It's just a story somebody wrote about Melchizedek. But again, Hebrews uses some of that thought process to talk about Jesus. And so so you do have some of that. But that part there, it is weird. He just suddenly shows up and Abraham gives him a tenth and it's like, okay, we're good. And then they're like, all right. So the angel of the Lord. When you see the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament, it's one of two things. And it's that all the time. The angel of the Lord is either God himself in human form, or it is a divine being who has the authority to speak in the first person on behalf of God, right? Which is possible. In the ancient world, a king would send out someone and that person would go and they would speak for the king, right? And so that was normal. And so that's certainly possible. But when you see the angel of the Lord, it generally ends up speaking in the first person as though it is God, right? So it's one of those two things. As you read your Bible in the Old Testament and you see the word Lord, right? When you see Lord in all caps, that means that the word behind that is the proper name of God, Yahweh, right? And so Jewish people did not like to write the name of God, so they would put other names in there instead, or they would just say Lord. Of course, they do it capitalized, and things like that. So English translations usually follow that same pattern. Sometimes people will say that, well, the Bible teaches polygamy. So if, well, I'm just going to go get multiple wives when they want to talk bad about the Bible, right? Absolutely, there are polygamists in the Bible, right? But at no point in time, A, does God say you need to go get multiple wives? And definitely at no time does it ever work out right. Okay, it is never a good thing, right? Never. There's never a positive moment when there's multiple wives. David has multiple wives. Solomon, it got him in lots of trouble. It just doesn't work out, right? And it is one of the funniest stories in the Old Testament where, of course, she gives Hagar over and she's all like, here, you'll have a child with her and everything. And then what does she say when the child's born? And Hagar treats her badly. See what you did to me? Abraham's like, I didn't do it. You made me do it, right? All right. It never works. So if anybody ever says something stupid to you like that, tell them, tell me which story in the Old Testament that it makes polygamy out to be a good thing, right? Because it never does. The binding of Isaac. Okay, so that's another story that when we get home, I'm sure that conversation at the dinner table was great. So what did you do today? Well, Dad took me out and tied me up, and it looked like he was going to sacrifice me, Mom. Right?
I got a question on that.
Okay.
Did God prepare Isaac, or have, because when they were going, Isaac said, I've got the wood, but where's the lamb? No. And then, did Isaac put up a fight to go on the altar?
It doesn't seem so, but it does not seem that he knew. And Abraham is absolutely going to sacrifice him, right? Because it says that God stopped him, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, again, we look at that and we say, well, that's just crazy. Like, why would he even do that, right? Today, if you heard a voice that said, sacrifice your child, hopefully you would go see a doctor, right? And you'd be like, hey, you know what? I don't know. Some of you might be like, I don't know. God told me, Yeah, right? Exactly. But listen, again, they live in the ancient world, right? And so around them would have been people who worship Molech and Chemosh, and they sacrificed children to both of those gods. And Abraham absolutely worshiped other gods before God came to him. Now, how that God clearly teaches him over a period of time, he absolutely believed, at least to a point. Did he get to a point to where he didn't even believe there were other gods? I don't know. But he absolutely believed in other gods early on, right? And so it would not have been as strange to him as we find it today, right? As crazy as that sounds. All right, Sodom, Gomorrah. Note that in the ancient world, because there weren't inns and such like we think of today, if someone were traveling and they came to your house, you had to let them in and you had to give them hospitality. It was a known thing throughout the ancient Near Eastern world, because I might be traveling one day and I might have to stay at somebody's house. So it was just kind of a well-known deal. If you've ever read the Odyssey, that's the whole point of the Odyssey, is that when Odysseus goes to the Cyclops cave, Polyphemus, neither one of them are hospitable to each other. They both treat each other badly, and that's what messes up Odysseus' trip home. In the ancient world, hospitality was, it was super important because it meant life or death. And so when these angels, which we know are angels, from reading it, when they come in and they, he's like, hey, I'll let you, Lot's like, hey, I'll let you in, and provide you with food and everything. Well, that would have been his job. Like he had to do that. And so, and it shows that he's still at least following the rules of hospitality. But when we read the story, like we feel pretty good about Lot, because Lot's all like, hey, come on in and I'll fix you a meal and everything. And then the people come, the guys come and they're like, hey, let them out here so we may, rape them. And, Lot's all like, no, you cannot do this evil thing, right? And you're like, Lot, good job. But then what does he say? But I have 2 daughters who have never known a man, and I'll send them out to you, right? And the angels are like, dude, you don't have to do that, right? So you're like, so that shows you how far Lot's gone. And And it also shows you that women had less importance in the ancient world, even than strange visitors, right? So there's that. And then the last thing that we'll do, which is very quick, is his wife, right? So we get where, of course, they're leaving and everything, and we're running, for our lives. And she looks back. It says, God said, don't look back. Or the angel, I think it was angel, says, don't look back, right? And so she looks back and she turns to salt, right? And again, let me just say the prophets question God. So it's okay if you ask God questions, and you look at the text and you say, you know what, that's seems harsh, right? That she turned to salt or whatever. And so what does that mean? Well, it doesn't say it explicitly in the text, but that verbiage, she looked back, probably means that she longed for that life that she was leaving, right? And so she wants to be back there. So that's the reason for the punishment, right? Is because she wants to go back. That's one of those things that scholars will argue and say, and again, the text doesn't say it explicitly, but it's certainly a possibility, and it seems to, now it could just be she disobeyed and God said, all right, you're a pillar of salt. Maybe, and God has that right. Just for the record, if God wants to do that, then God can do that. But it does seem likely. Like, why would you look back, right? Like, she just wants to see the fireworks, like maybe. But it does seem possible that that's it. Thanks for watching, and please feel free to leave a comment or question. And if you found this video helpful, hit like. And if you would like to be notified when new videos are released, hit subscribe and join us next time as we study the Bible in context.